What's going on, everyone? So I need to tell you about something that went down on First Take this morning that had me literally jumping out of my seat and spilling coffee all over my kitchen counter because I was so hyped up about what I was hearing. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that this might have been the most energetic and passionate segment I've ever seen on that show in all the years I've been a religious viewer. I had just woken up and was groggily making my breakfast when I turned on ESPN and saw that Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharpe and Monica McNutt were going to be discussing the Las Vegas Raiders off-season plan. And at first, I thought it was just going to be the usual speculation about their head coaching search and whether they're going to hire Clint Kubiak or Davis Webb or whoever else is in the mix. But then, about 15 minutes into the segment, Stephen A. drops this absolute bombshell about how the Raiders should be making an aggressive push to trade for Denzel Ward from the Cleveland Browns to address what is clearly the most glaring weakness on their entire roster. And I literally stopped what I was doing mid-bite, because this was such a perfect suggestion that made so much sense on so many different levels that I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it myself. Hey, what's up, everyone? Before we dive into everything I have for you today, I need to share something real with you that would mean the absolute world to me. That subscribe button right there, hitting it right now would bring me one step closer to my dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers. I know you're eager to get into all this content, but real quick, just smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It's such a simple thing. It takes literally 1 second, but it's honestly the biggest way you can support this journey and help me reach that milestone. Trust me, every single subscription gets me closer to that goal. And honestly, it would mean everything to me. So do me that quick favor right now and be part of this dream becoming reality. So First Take came back from their commercial break, and you could immediately tell that this was going to be a high-energy segment because Stephen A. was already on his feet before Molly Karam even finished introducing the topic, and Shannon Sharpe had this huge grin on his face, like he knew he was about to say something that was going to get people fired up. And Monica McNutt was sitting there with multiple pages of notes spread out in front of her, like she'd been researching this topic for days. And then they put up the graphic showing the Las Vegas Raiders logo with the words "off-season priorities" underneath it. And Stephen A. immediately launched into this incredibly detailed and passionate monologue about how the Raiders are at this critical crossroads moment in their franchise history, where they can either continue to flounder in mediocrity and irrelevance, or they can make bold, aggressive moves to accelerate their rebuild and get back to being a competitive team that people actually take seriously. Stephen A. was talking about how the Raiders just finished one of the worst seasons in franchise history, how they were terrible on both sides of the ball, but especially on defense, how they gave up big plays constantly and couldn't stop anybody when it mattered, and how if you're Tom Brady and John Spytek and you're looking at this roster trying to figure out how to fix it, you have to start by acknowledging that your secondary is an absolute disaster and needs to be completely overhauled. And Stephen A. was getting really animated here, pacing around the studio with his arms gesturing wildly, talking about how the Raiders don't have a single cornerback on their roster right now who would start for any other playoff team in the NFL, and how that's completely unacceptable for an organization that's trying to build a winner around a young quarterback like Fernando Mendoza, who they're about to draft with the #1 overall pick. And this is where Stephen A.'s argument took this turn that had me absolutely riveted, because instead of just talking in general terms about how the Raiders need to upgrade their secondary, Stephen A. started getting really specific about Denzel Ward and why Ward would be the perfect player for the Raiders to target via trade. Stephen A. was explaining that Ward is a 27-year-old Pro Bowl cornerback who's still in his prime years, who has multiple years of All-Pro caliber play on his resume, who was the 4th overall pick in the draft, so he has that pedigree and that elite talent level, and who's currently stuck on a Cleveland Browns team that's going through a complete organizational overhaul with a new head coach in Todd Monken, and that's probably going to be looking to move some of their high-priced veterans in exchange for draft picks, and cap relief. Shannon Sharpe immediately jumped in here, and I have to say, Shannon brought this incredible energy and enthusiasm to the conversation that really elevated the entire segment. Shannon was talking about how the Raiders are in this unique position where they have over $100 million in salary cap space heading into the offseason, which is the second most in the entire NFL, and how they have 10 total draft picks, including the number 1 overall pick, and how this combination of cap space and draft capital gives them the flexibility to make big, splashy moves that most teams simply cannot afford to make. And Shannon was making this really compelling argument about how, when you're rebuilding a team, you can't just rely on drafting rookies and hoping they develop. You also need to bring in established veterans who can provide leadership and stability, and who can help accelerate the development of your young players. And Shannon was getting really passionate here, talking about how if you're Fernando Mendoza and you're this 22-year-old rookie quarterback who's about to get drafted number 1 overall by the Raiders, you're going to be looking around that locker room trying to figure out who the leaders are and who the established winners are that you can learn from. And right now, the Raiders don't have enough of those guys. Shannon was saying that bringing in someone like Denzel Ward, who's been to Pro Bowls, who's been an All-Pro, who's played in big games, and who knows what it takes to compete at the highest level, that would send a message to Mendoza and to all the other young players on the roster that the organization is serious about winning and is willing to invest in bringing in quality veterans to help build a winning culture. Monica McNutt then came in with what I thought was an absolutely brilliant breakdown of the Raiders' current defensive situation and why their secondary specifically is such a critical need that has to be addressed this offseason. Monica started by showing film from various Raiders games this past season where their cornerbacks were getting absolutely torched by opposing receivers, where they were consistently beaten on deep routes, where they were giving up huge plays in crucial situations, and where they just looked completely overmatched against even average NFL offenses. And Monica was providing all this statistical context, showing how the Raiders were ranked near the bottom of the league in pass defense, how they gave up the most passing touchdowns of any team in the AFC, how their cornerbacks had the fewest interceptions and pass breakups of any secondary in football. And Monica was really emphasizing this point about how, when you're trying to rebuild a defense, the cornerback position is absolutely critical, because in today's NFL, where every team is passing the ball 35 or 40 times per game, if you don't have cornerbacks who can cover, your entire defense falls apart. Monica was explaining that you can have the best pass rush in the world, you can have the best linebackers in the world, but if your cornerbacks are getting beaten consistently, opposing quarterbacks are just going to get rid of the ball quickly and pick you apart, and that's exactly what happened to the Raiders all season long. Stephen A. then brought up what he said was maybe the most important factor in all of this, which is the Tom Brady element and how Brady's involvement as an owner gives the Raiders this unique recruiting advantage that most teams don't have. Stephen A. was talking about how Tom Brady is the greatest player in NFL history, how he's won 7 Super Bowls, how he's this iconic figure that every player in the league respects and admires, and how if Tom Brady is personally calling Denzel Ward and telling him that the Raiders want him and that they're building something special in Las Vegas, and that Ward can be a cornerstone piece of this rebuild, that's going to carry a lot of weight in Ward's decision-making process. And Stephen A. was really hammering this point home, saying that the Raiders need to lean into the Tom Brady factor and use it to their advantage in free agency and in trade negotiation, because right now, the Raiders' reputation around the league is terrible after years of dysfunction and losing. But having Brady in the building changes that perception and makes Las Vegas a more attractive destination for players who want to win. Stephen A. was saying that if he's Tom Brady, he's getting on the phone with Denzel Ward right now, and he's selling him on the vision for the Raiders, and he's explaining how Ward can be the defensive leader who helps turn this franchise around. First Take then brought in their NFL insider Adam Schefter via satellite connection, and Schefter started providing some really fascinating behind-the-scenes information about what's actually happening with the Cleveland Browns and their willingness to potentially trade Denzel Ward. According to Schefter's sources, the Browns are in a complete state of flux right now, with their new head coach Todd Monken coming in and wanting to put his own stamp on the roster. And Monken is very much an offensive-minded coach who's going to prioritize building up the offense rather than investing heavily in expensive defensive players. And Schefter was saying that Ward's contract, which pays him about $20 million per year, is a significant cap hit for a team that has a lot of other financial obligations, and that the Browns could potentially save a lot of money and acquire valuable draft picks by trading Ward to a team that's willing to take on that contract. Schefter also mentioned something really interesting, which is that, according to people around the league, Denzel Ward himself is frustrated with the losing culture in Cleveland and is open to the idea of being traded to a team where he'd have a better chance to compete for a championship. And Schefter was saying that while the Raiders obviously aren't a championship contender right now, the combination of having the #1 pick, having a ton of cap space, having Tom Brady involved in the organization, and potentially hiring an exciting young offensive coach like Clint Kubiak could make Las Vegas an attractive destination for Ward if he's looking for a fresh start and a chance to be part of something that's building towards success. Monica then jumped back in with some really detailed statistical analysis comparing Denzel Ward's production over the past few years to the production of the Raiders' current cornerbacks. And honestly, the gap in talent level was absolutely staggering. Monica was showing how Ward has consistently been one of the best coverage cornerbacks in the entire NFL, how he's allowed the lowest completion percentage in his coverage areas among all qualified cornerbacks, how he's generated more pass breakups and defended passes than anyone on the Raiders roster, and how his presence would immediately elevate the entire defense just by taking away the opponent's #1 receiver on every play. And Monica was making this really smart point about how when you have an elite cornerback like Denzel Ward, it creates this cascading effect where your entire defense gets better. Because you can play more aggressive schemes, you can send more blitzes, your safeties don't have to shade over to help as much, and your pass rush has more time to get home because the quarterback can't just throw to his first read immediately. Monica was showing film examples of this, comparing how the Raiders' defense looked when their cornerbacks were getting beaten versus how other defenses look when they have elite cornerback play, and the difference was night and day. Shannon then made what I thought was maybe the most compelling argument of the entire segment, which was about the leadership and veteran presence that Denzel Ward would bring to a young Raiders defense that desperately needs someone to set the standard and show the younger players what it takes to compete at a high level. Shannon was talking about how the Raiders are going to be drafting a bunch of rookies this year with all their draft picks, how they're going to be signing young free agents, and how all these young players are going to be looking around for mentors and leaders who can teach them the right way to prepare and practice and play. And Shannon was getting really passionate about this, talking about how Ward has been a team captain in Cleveland, how he's known as one of the hardest workers in the building, how he's a film junkie who studies opposing offenses obsessively, and how having someone like that in your locker room can completely change the culture and the work ethic of your entire team. Shannon was saying that this is especially important for the Raiders, who have had a reputation for years of being a soft team that doesn't work hard enough and doesn't have enough leaders who hold each other accountable. First Take then showed some really interesting financial analysis about how the Raiders could actually structure a trade for Denzel Ward and how they could fit his contract into their cap structure. They brought in their salary cap expert, who explained that with over $100 million in cap space, the Raiders could easily absorb Ward's $20 million per year salary without having to make any painful cuts elsewhere on the roster, and that they could even potentially restructure Ward's contract to lower his cap hit in the first year and spread the money out over future years if they wanted more flexibility to make other moves. The expert was also explaining that from a trade compensation standpoint, the Raiders would probably have to give up something like a second-round pick or maybe a couple of mid-round picks to get Cleveland to part with Ward, but that this would be a steal considering Ward's talent level and the impact he could have on their defense. The expert was saying that using your second or third round pick on a proven Pro Bowl cornerback who's still in his prime is way better value than using that same pick to draft a rookie cornerback who might not pan out and who's going to take years to develop, even if he does. Stephen A. then brought up what he said was a potential concern that Raiders fans might have about trading for Denzel Ward, which is Ward's injury history, and whether he can stay healthy for a full season. Stephen A. was acknowledging that Ward has dealt with various injuries throughout his career, particularly concussion issues that have caused him to miss games, and that this is a legitimate risk factor that the Raiders would have to weigh when deciding whether to make this trade. But Stephen A. was also arguing that when you're a team that's as talent-deficient as the Raiders currently are, you can't afford to be too picky or too risk-averse, and that sometimes you have to take calculated risks on talented players who have injury concerns because the potential upside is so high. Shannon agreed with this and added that a lot of Ward's injuries in Cleveland were the result of him having to play so many snaps and having to do so much because the defense around him wasn't good enough, and that coming to a situation in Las Vegas where hopefully they'll be adding other defensive pieces and where Ward wouldn't have to carry such a heavy burden might actually help him stay healthier. Shannon was saying that sometimes a change of scenery and a fresh start in a new organization with a new training staff and new strength and conditioning coaches can make a big difference for players who've had injury issues. Monica then made what I thought was a really insightful point about the timing of this potential trade and why the Raiders need to be aggressive about pursuing it right now rather than waiting. Monica was explaining that with the Browns hiring a new head coach and going through organizational changes, this is the perfect window for the Raiders to pounce, because Cleveland is going to be more willing to make trades and move pieces around than they would be in a normal year when they're trying to compete. Monica was saying that opportunities like this don't come around very often, where you have a chance to trade for an all-pro caliber player who's still in his prime, and that the Raiders would be foolish to pass this up just because they're worried about giving up a draft pick or taking on some salary. And Monica was really emphasizing this urgency factor, talking about how the Raiders are about to draft Fernando Mendoza with the #1 pick, and how they need to surround him with as much talent as possible immediately, rather than asking him to carry a terrible roster for years while they slowly rebuild through the draft. Monica was saying that if you can accelerate your rebuild by trading for established veterans like Denzel Ward, while also drafting well and developing young players, you can compress your timeline from being a 3 or 4 year rebuild to being competitive in 1 or 2 years. First Take then showed some film comparison between Denzel Ward and some of the other cornerbacks who might be available via trade or free agency this offseason, and it was pretty clear that Ward was in a different tier of talent compared to most of the other options. They showed Ward's coverage skills, his ball tracking ability, his tackling in the run game, his versatility to play both man and zone coverage, and it was obvious that he would represent a massive upgrade over anyone currently on the Raiders roster. The segment was starting to wind down, and it was time for everyone to give their final takes on whether the Las Vegas Raiders should trade for Denzel Ward. Stephen A. went first and said emphatically that yes, the Raiders absolutely should do whatever it takes to get Ward, that they have the cap space and the draft capital to make it happen, and that bringing in a player of Ward's caliber would send a message to the entire organization and to the fan base that they're serious about winning. Stephen A. was saying that if he's Tom Brady and John Spytek, he's on the phone with Cleveland right now, working out the details of this trade. Stephen A. put the odds of Ward ending up with the Raiders at around 40 to 45%. Shannon went next and was even more enthusiastic, saying that this trade makes so much sense on so many different levels that the Raiders would be making a huge mistake if they don't pursue it aggressively. Shannon was talking about how the Raiders have been irrelevant for so long and how they need to make a splash move that gets people excited about the franchise again. And bringing in Denzel Ward alongside drafting Fernando Mendoza would absolutely do that. Shannon put the odds at 50 to 55% and said he thinks there's a real chance this happens. Monica went last and said she thinks the fit is perfect and that both teams would benefit from this trade. The Browns would get draft capital to help their rebuild under Todd Monken, and the Raiders would get an elite cornerback who can be the defensive leader they desperately need. Monica was saying that if the asking price is reasonable, something like a second-round pick plus a mid-round pick in a future year, the Raiders should absolutely pull the trigger on this trade. Monica put the odds at 45%.